taken the job opportunity of being involved in the Portuguese repressive apparatus and carry them over into Rhodesia with the idea that they would form an organization that then would attack Mozambique directly, and that was what happened. Renamo, the Movement for National Resistance, as it called, was really from the outset an instrument of the Rhodesian government, with its indigenous base as limited as I have said, really the detritus, if you like, of the colonial apparatus, and with certain recruits coming from various corners, but very few other than through this kind of reactivation of a police net. Now, with the fall of Rhodesia, with the coming of Zimbabwe, the victory by ZANU, the South Africans literally picked up this group and carried it south to South Africa and set it running now in an even more aggressive way from the Northern Transvaal, from South Africa. I don't think any historian of these things can doubt that that's the case. And so you get a very clear picture of where Renamo comes from. It's not, in that sense, an indigenous movement. It's very much a pawn, cat's paw of external powers who wish Mozambique ill, and they wish it ill in part because they felt that they had to neutralize any support that Mozambique, Samora, Machel would be giving to the ANC, although the Mozambicans were frank from a very early stage that there was a limit, given the strength of South Africa, to what they could do in that sphere. They also wanted to undermine the sense that Mozambique was a successful nationalist, successful socialist experiment that close to South Africa as a kind of an alternative model to apartheid. And they also wanted to undermine the linkages that were being established between the newly independent states in the region, to some degree outside the economic hegemony of South Africa itself. And you can see that many of the targets that the South Africans pointed Renamo towards were precisely rail and other sorts of linkages, for example, that tied Zimbabwe into Mozambique and began to establish certain kinds of linkages between those two countries at the expense of the old linkages that had tied Zimbabwe, Rhodesia as it was, into the South African economic net. So there's an attempt to undermine that kind of regional alternative to South Africa's economic and political hegemony. And so that the Renamo then was set running to actually carry out this gruesome task. And in fact, what's I think particularly remarkable about Renamo is that it has never had much more of a task than that. Very little sense that Renamo has attempted to develop an ideology, a counter-ideology, or anything like the basis of a popular guerrilla struggle that Frelimo had when it was fighting against the Portuguese. That it has been based on two things: economic destruction and intimidation of the local populations, real terrorism. But with the idea that people will at least get the notion that somehow the Frelimo government doesn't quite work, it can't quite protect them, it can't deliver the goods economically. Not then that Renamo becomes a acceptable alternative, because its gruesome tactics, in a sense, have not been designed to win popular support, but at least to neutralize that population, to make Mozambique not work.
How long does the president think it would take to completely wipe out the remnants of bandits in the country?
Há calamidades que nós podemos prever o seu fim.
There are some types of disasters that we can foresee an end to. There are others whose end cannot be foreseen.
Por exemplo, quando há terremoto,
For example, when there's an earthquake
com grandes danos,
causing massive damage
destruições.
and destruction,
Quando é num país subdesenvolvido, é difícil
if it happens
prever
in an underdeveloped
quando
country,
reconstruiremos
it is difficult to predict when it will be possible to rebuild.
subdesenvolvido. Mas quando se é país altamente desenvolvido,
But when it happens in a highly developed country,
em quanto
it
tempo
is
a
possible to
cidade
predict
será reconstruída,
how long it will take to rebuild
em quanto
people's
tempo
homes,
as habitações serão reconstruídas, em quanto tempo as
how long
fábricas
it'll take to
serão
rebuild
reconstruídas.
factories.
Quando se trata, por exemplo, de gelo na Europa,
When you're dealing, for example, with winter
podemos
in
prever
Europe,
também o seu fim.
you can predict its end.
Quando a primavera chega,
When the
já
thaw
podemos
comes,
planificar,
you can make plans.
porque há degelo,
It is the springtime.
podemos planificar.
You can make plans.
Mas quando se trata de uma praga,
But when you're dealing with a plague of
parasitas,
filthy parasites,
aí é difícil.
it's difficult.
Quando se trata de gafanhotos,
When you're dealing with locust,
em que tem os
who've
seus
already laid their
ovos,
eggs
em que tem as suas
and have left
lêndias
their offspring,
e tem os
and
seus
destructive
efeitos
effects,
destrutivos, aí é muito
then
difícil de
it is very
prever
difficult to say
quando é que
when we will be able to eliminate
somos
them
capazes de eliminar
definitively.
definitivamente. A pergunta seria assim.
Your question
Eu
should be
gostaria
this.
que fizesse assim a
I wish you would ask me a question like this.
Camarada presidente,
Comrade
quando
President,
é que pensa que as capitais
when do you
europeias
think European
deixarão de
countries will stop
apoiar
supporting the
os
armed
bandidos
bandits?
armados? Porque estes bandidos armados
Because these bandits
é a escória
are the
do
leftovers
exército
of the
colonial
Portuguese
português.
colonial army,
É a escória da PIDE.
the scum
É a
of the secret
escória
police,
da marginalidade, dos
of
marginados,
marginality,
dos criminosos, dos
murderers,
assassinos, dos criminosos de guerra.
war
Então são
criminals.
estes. Então perguntariam,
So you should ask,
nas capitais desenvolvidas que têm
those
interesse
European
em
countries
suprir
who have interests in
os bandidos
Mozambique
armados,
but
quando
support the armed bandits,
eu daria a resposta.
when will they stop?
Eu diria, sim.
Then I would give you an answer. It's up to them, those who created the bandits, their masters. Then we'd get rid of them quickly, because they don't have a social base. They don't have the support of the people. They don't have political or economic objectives. They are simply armed bandits.
Não passam de ladrões armados, assassinos, portanto. E se me perguntasse também,
And if you ask me too,
a criminalidade,
when will there be an end to crime in New York?
quando é que acabará a criminalidade em Londres?
When will there be an end to crime in London, in Paris,
E noutras
in Bonn,
capitais grandes da
and in
Europa
other
e da
big
América,
cities of Europe
Estados Unidos da América?
and the United States of
Seria bom.
America?
Quando é que a Europa vai eliminar
When will Europe
dezenas de
eliminate
milhões
tens of millions of
desempregados
unemployed in the world?
Sim, senhora.
Yes,
Quando
sir.
é que o mundo planifica
When will the
acabar
world
com
put
a
an end to
fome,
hunger,
que é a maior preocupação da humanidade?
which is the biggest preoccupation of mankind?
Quando é que os homens entrarão
When will
em
mankind agree to put an end to the
concordância
manufacture of
para acabar com o
armaments
fabrico de armamento
and nuclear
e
weapons?
bombas nucleares? Aí diria, os bandidos
Then I would
armados
say
vão acabar em-
the armed bandits in Mozambique would quickly disappear.
I think that victory that Frelimo achieved over the Portuguese was a spark that has had resonance throughout the region. So just his ability to galvanize, in the first instance, the military success of Frelimo, to make a major contribution. Now, mind you, there were struggles, as we know, in Guinea-Bissau and in Angola, and internal struggles within Portugal that led to the coup that ultimately guaranteed Frelimo's passage to independence. But first and foremost, that coup and that victory was a military victory in Africa, and Samora Machel made that happen. It communicated beyond Mozambique. He facilitated, in the first instance, ZANU's struggle in Zimbabwe. He opened up Tet for them to enter. He gave them an example, I think. There's no doubt that the victory of Frelimo had resonance in South Africa. That's one of the reasons South Africa has bent all its efforts to destroy Mozambique. Immediately after the fall of Portugal and the coming into power of a Mozambican government in 1975, there was pro-Frelimo demonstrations and activities inside South Africa. So that ability to turn the tables on the oppressor in Southern Africa in a different way than nationalisms elsewhere that hadn't had so markedly to fight for their freedom, I think was crucially important.
Comrade Samora, who is with us, Samora Moises Machel. It's a household word.
To stop Marxism in Mozambique, did the South Africans kill Samora Machel?
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence that suggests that's quite a possible hypothesis. Certainly, the Mozambican government seems to feel that to be the case, and a lot of independent evidence about the nature of the radio signals, for example, the beacon that apparently drew the Samora Machel's airplane off course and caused it to crash. I get the impression the evidence adds up to making that charge, but it's not a hard and fast case. and perhaps we'll never know for certain. The circumstantial evidence suggests that's a pretty good hypothesis. I think what is, in a sense, even more interesting is that that can be such a plausible hypothesis, because if, in fact, the South Africans did kill Samora Machel, it's very much of a piece, and I think this is why many observers feel it's as likely as it is. It's very much of a piece with the destructive activities that South Africa have carried out generally against Mozambique. I mean, I don't think one can underestimate the extent to which the war that South Africa has launched via Renamo is a war to destroy the fabric of a society. It's absolutely cynical and ruthless in the extreme, without any redeeming political program to give it more sense than merely to neutralize Mozambique. And in that context, it makes perfect sense for them to have carried that one step further, to have killed so many Mozambicans. It's that much easier to kill a president.
I now call upon him so that the people who are represented by you, the people of Zimbabwe, can, through you, through your eyes, see him once again, and through your hearts, pay him those warm sentiments that he deserves as a true freedom fighter and revolutionary. Samora.
Viva ZANU! Viva ZANU! Viva ZANU! Viva ZANU! Viva ZANU! Viva o povo do Zimbábue! Viva o povo do Zimbábue! Viva a amizade entre Moçambique e Zimbábue! Viva a amizade entre Zimbábue e Moçambique! Viva o camarada Robert Mugabe! Viva o camarada Robert Mugabe! A luta continua! A luta continua! A luta continua! Obrigado, amigo.
The colonial government exploited us for so long. Exploited our mothers. Exploited our grandfathers. But Frelimo liberated us, freed us from slavery.
Angamo wakale wo yosholole lengo posei